Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight goes to the week in business and future affairs. Market watch, industries, analysis and insights. We've got you covered right here on Niaga Spotlight. Well, today on Future Affairs, we're looking at a very interesting topic, which is sustainability and palm oil supply chains. Now, did you know it's very interesting that the palm oil industry, of course, contributed around 35 billion ringgit to Malaysia's total GDP back in 2022. With, of course, sustainability becoming the core focus for global supply chains, it's also important for Malaysia's palm oil industry to step up in the same vein. Now, small farmer communities, they require supply chains that are not only socially responsible, but environmentally sustainable, and at the same time, of course, economically viable over the next 20 to 30 years. Dr. Asad Atta, Director for the Center for Sustainable Small Owners and Associate Professor II of Operations and Supply Chain Management at the Asia School of Business, joins me for this interesting discussion. Dr. Asad, thank you so much for making time for Niaga Spotlight. How are you doing?
Good. Alhamdulillah.
Fantastic.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So it's very, we're very glad to have you in the studios with us here. But before we start off on the core discussion, Dr. Asad, now you've been working within the general sustainability and supply chain sector arena for over 12 years. So back in the early 2010s, when you actually started off with going deeper into this core area of interest as an educator and also as a practitioner, it wasn't that popular, so to speak.
Exactly.
So what actually got you started off on this path, Dr. Asad?
Okay. Thank you for the opening question. It's a helpful question to bring in a little bit context about my personal background and what got me started. So as you pointed out, I'm a lecturer, I'm a professor, I teach at the Asia School of Business in operations and supply chain management. And primarily I've been trained as an operations researcher. So many people don't know what's operations research. It's about the science of decision making, it's about optimizing, it's about bringing things together and make them better.
Right.
So
optimizing everything all at once.
Optimizing everything. So when we do that as operation researchers, we ask, so how can we do it better? And when we have done it, we ask the same question again after some time, how can we make even better? So it's not about even better, it's sometimes the problem changes. So that's what gets me excited. And especially it's a very dynamic landscape. Now we talk about sustainability, we talk about other different challenges, especially in the oil palm sector. Then we have different players. We have small farmers, which are not very much talked about. And when I say small farmers, I mean independent smallholder farmers. So I also come from a farming background.
I see,
from my own personal background. So that kind of connects me to the oil palm independent smallholders in Malaysia. And connecting back to my field, I'll give you an example. So part of the discovery for me when I began to get vetted into the area of supply chain management, especially food and agricultural sector, was like hunger. So hunger is not a production problem. It's more about supply chain, it's about logistics, it's about we have enough today that we produce. How can we make it available to the places we need it the most?
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you are able to really zone in on one of the most critical issues, regardless of the time, season or the year. But I think especially once the COVID pandemic of 2020 hit, everybody, even the average person on the street, was suddenly hyper aware of this big issue, which only had considered policymakers and perhaps industrial sectors, supply chains. So coming back into agriculture, now are there any perhaps working examples that you've even been able to observe, Dr. Asad, perhaps to do with coming from your own familial background, harvest cycles, and how those have also massively changed over just the past half decade? Let's not even talk about a decade.
There's no one solution that fits all. So again, in the context of the oil palm, most of the research and the context and the news that you see when we talk about oil palm, it's about estates, it's about bigger plantations.
That's right.
When we talk about small farmers, it's about scheme or organized small farmers. So the solution that applies to one may not apply to the other. And what works for the small farmers, the scheme farmers, may not work for the independent smallholder farmers. And especially with the COVID, with the shortage of the harvesters, there were problems that affected across the domain, and there were problems that particularly hit the farmers who were not managing their farms on their own. And a lot of smallholders, even though they are independent and small, manage it by contractors.
Understood.
So we have some interesting research. I can talk about that if we have time, and where we discovered how COVID was playing a role.
Sure, sure.
In these farmers.
I would love for you to share a little bit more about that.
Oh, so for example, we try to help these farmers get certified, and we are trying to make a case where certification helps improvement in yield, because we are trying not only to instill compliance, we are also trying to make everyone responsible, but then we are trying to build a business case where you do the right thing, there's a business case in there for you. So, but that is something yet to be proven, how much that impact is there. And we compared, so it's a longitudinal study. We compared the results before the farmers were certified to after they were certified. And then we found, well, our results were showing yield was improving. And then when we bring in the factors of the harvester availability, it was actually, to us, looked like, for example, the women farmers did better after the COVID. But then it was tied up to the women farmers mostly depending on the harvesters who became available later. We thought contractor managed farms were doing better after the COVID pandemic. Then we connected it back and we found that contractors were not having harvesters before. So it's a bit nuanced when you go in and try to look into the different factors which are overall playing a role. It gets very interesting.
That's fascinating, and we'll go much deeper into that a little bit later on. But first, moving the focus back to your work that actually spans multinational corporations, NGOs, and even the government sector. Dr. Asad, tell me more about how your perspective has been shaped on sustainability and responsible practices via your interaction with these multiple stakeholders.
So the interesting thing is, everyone understands today that incorporating sustainability and sustainable practices in their supply chain is no more like a good to have. You know, it's no more the time where you only talk about.
It's not a luxury.
It's not a luxury. It's not about we just talk about the financial performance as a measure of success. You have to talk about the ESG impact. You have to talk about the triple bottom line, bringing in people and environment along with the profit. So more and more organizations and multinational corporations are understanding that, and it's becoming important. And they are ready to make a genuine contribution to make an actual impact. And they understand that you cannot be reactive about it. It's no more about like a whack-a-mole where you get called out by an NGO and then you react to it. But then there is sustainability is complex. So you need to really get down across the supply chain to different stakeholders, and the fact of the matter may be the biggest impact may be somewhere down or up your supply chain with somebody else, another partner of yours. So unless you have a good vertical and horizontal collaboration, the way you work, you could be easily called out. So it's important to look a holistic view to what we say is a systems approach to your supply chain.
I love the fact that you're starting off from the rise of the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps of people, profit, and planet. But at the same time, we are also very focused now, I think about 2-3 years since this became a commonplace, ubiquitous term, on focusing on doing the best we can to not be greenwashing per se. So from there, Dr. Asad, I think it's a perfect time for us to go in a little bit deeper and tell us more about the center that you lead for SMEs and small farmers for palm oil in Malaysia. So what are some of the main objectives and initiatives of this center?
Okay. So the center is called the Center for Sustainable Small Owners, and that includes the independent smallholders primarily. It includes the collection centers, which are the middlemen. You know, I talked about the systemic issues when, until some time back, it was assumed that the small farmers can directly supply to the mill. Okay, it's only when you go down, then you get to see that actually in Malaysia, for example, the mills are so big, and the independent smallholder farmers, which I call them accidental farmers because they joined the bandwagon because oil palm was doing good, Felda had a good story, you know. So,
but then this was maybe 3 decades ago or so.
Yeah, 2000 and so forth, right? And so a lot of farmers got on the oil palm bandwagon, and they started to produce oil palm, but then they had a very small part of land. They had 1 hectare or less than 1 hectare. Johor, we find the farmers we are working with on an average is 1 hectare.
I see, yes. And actually, according to the Malaysian Palm Oil Board in 2022, they only make up about 14% or so of total land under palm oil.
Understood. Yeah, that's the number. But then it is increasing.
Right.
It's increasing. So these independent smallholder farmers are creating a bigger impact, and the system is not designed to. We have a good solution to an old problem. Okay.
Okay. Understood.
And now, with these independent smallholders, with their volume and their numbers increasing, the mills being big, for example, we need the intermediaries. The mills cannot talk to these onesie, twosies, the small farmers. So it generates a layer of middlemen. Now, not all middlemen are bad in that sense. They provide a service. They are aggregators.
Fair enough.
But even at the level of aggregators, they are not big enough. So they need another level of super aggregators. So that's how the independent smallholder supply chain works. And then when the downstream mills or the MNCs are called out to provide traceability, it's a huge challenge. So at least what we are trying to do through this center is establish traceability, establish transparency to these farmers who are working, empower them by building independent smallholder associations.
Right.
So in a way, we are managing that independence. Okay. And
making it more impactful, ideally, right? Not just giving them voice, but ensuring that the voice reaches into perhaps even the policy arenas.
That's the goal. When the voice is collective, when they are existing as an association, then again, it's like the school of fish, small fish coming together.
That's
and
right.
trying to make a bigger impact. And then compliance becomes an issue. So while they are independent, it's very difficult to track them, it's very difficult to enforce, it's very difficult to make them aware.
Fair enough.
It's not an easy problem. But then when you have them together, like we have created an association called Pertubuhan Tani Niaga Lestari Johor, and that association is managed by the independent farmers themselves.
That's amazing. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about the sustainability scorecards for the farmers and collection centers, which sounds like something that further helps to organize the work that they're doing?
Okay, so in 2019, MSPO became mandatory. RSPO also had a standard that was specifically designed for these independent smallholder farmers. And we have always been advocating something that is rightfully designed for these independent smallholder farmers.
Right.
Until then, since there was no one standard to follow, we designed scorecards which were like very easy to understand, to communicate, to take a stock of themselves, and at the same time had motivation for these farmers to compete with others. We took our farmers to RSPO convention, the annual one in Johor, farmers to Indonesia and Thailand. And when they saw farmers from Thailand, from Indonesia, and they saw how organized they were, even though they were independent, it served as a motivation to them. And then they had their scorecard. They could take some stock of themselves. Otherwise, without knowing how they were doing, and it's a challenge for them even to know how much they've spent, what was their previous yield. So it's a kind of sanity check for them.
Right. And it's also, in a sense, it is a bit of a budgeting sheet that helps them to be a lot more cognizant.
It helps in the yield, it helps in some of the sustainability parameters and practices, and it helps in terms of budgeting and what goes in and what's coming out. So these farmers are becoming more and more aware about the financial implications. So over the period, we are trying to help make them see that they do the right thing. At the same time, if they also are trying to do the right agronomy practices, which we call good agricultural practices, there are ways to do things right, then there is scope for improving their yields. And we have, in our small group of farmers with control farm and check farms, demonstrated yields which are more than 30% over a period of 3 to 4 years.
That's fantastic and significant, 30% more.
Yes, 30% improvement in yield. And the fine print is the poorer off you are, the better off you can be. You know, so that's the fine print. But then again, these scorecards and managing these farmers and having something to take stock of their own practices in the past, how it's impacting currently, it serves as these farmers become then ambassadors and then try to bring in others to this program.
Because you now have a baseline.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Dr. Asad. We take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tamina Kausji. Today, of course, we are discussing sustainability and palm oil supply chains in Malaysia. Dr. Asad, continuing the conversation, now let's talk about what are some of the key challenges which are faced by these independent smallholders in small farmer communities when it comes to establishing sustainable supply chains.
Okay, thank you for the question again. At least I love talking about it because there are some genuine issues. So as I mentioned earlier, I personally sometimes call these farmers accidental farmers. Okay, so they thought this was a good thing to do, and now we have a big number of them. So where do they sell their fruit to? So they would want to sell it to the mills. I've highlighted the mismatch between
the
them
big
being small.
marketplace.
Yeah. So more than that, the mills also are using these independent smallholder farmers mostly as fillers, which means when the supply is low, then we will come to you. When there's a peak season, then we have our own internal supplies, which are
right. So does that mean that, in a sense, they are now kind of getting relegated to the wayside rather
Yes.
than having a guaranteed end customer?
So you pointed out exactly right. So that is the issue. Now, when we have not visited the field, the argument one would make is that actually these farmers are independent, they have better bargaining power. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So
the harsh reality.
The harsh reality is they're more used as a filler. So they don't have a constant supply. They have a constant supply, but they don't have a constant place to guarantee that the supply would be received. Okay, that's one part. Second, again, is the work that we are doing is with the farmers who are the third generation. They're elderly, they're set in their ways. So a lot of that, what is happening, it's difficult to communicate. It's difficult to change the behavior, okay? And a lot of the younger generation is leaving, okay? So the little hope that we have to keep this generation inside and make farming more attractive, okay? That's a challenge that continues to be
mostly
the case.
due to the volatile nature of the supply.
Mostly due to the volatile nature of the supply, and farming, if you are not bringing in the latest tools and technology, then to the younger generation, it's very difficult to keep farming as an interesting profession to keep. But that's where, again, some of our weakest points are too. Overall, in the case of the oil palm industry in Malaysia especially, labor is an issue. So how can we channel our younger generation to be helping on the labor side, becoming, for example, harvesting can be a respectable profession. Okay?
That's right, professionalizing these industries, ideally.
And more often than not, technology is thought of as a panacea, it will come and solve it. But the actual solution has to be a socio-technological solution where you will bring a solution not from outside the field, but somewhere inside the field with the same people who are doing it, not removing them away by bringing in a solution that works in a lab. Okay, so that has been the ongoing challenge.
And on average, let's say within a good season, in the experience of your center, Dr. Asad, how much would a singular smallholding family or entity with their roughly 1 acre expect to bring in during a good season?
Again,
can we enumerate that somewhat finitely, or does it really fluctuate that much?
It fluctuates. It fluctuates, and again, a better question or to answer would be, because the price moves. During COVID, the price of the fruit, I'm not talking about the oil palm, the price of the fruit was more than 1,000. Before COVID, it was about 570 during the 20. And then again 2023 it went back to about 670. The price is fluctuating. This is the price of the fruit to the farmer. Okay. However, the percentage or the value that the farmer gets is about 65 to 70%.
I see.
So,
all right. So it's fairly high as well.
So 25 to 30% is kind of lost with these intermediaries because you are not directly supplying to the mill, and at the same time, the fruit itself, it's a remarkable fruit, the palm fruit. It has palm kernel meal that has a price. It has palm kernel oil, palm kernel that goes out in the front. So the farmers who are so far up don't get this added value of the other products which are a 15 to 20% contributor in the revenue.
Understood.
So with mills which are so big, if we had smaller mills, smaller supply chains which are more transparent and that opacity of the system is not there, the farmers can benefit more. So today they lose 25 to 30%, I would say, of the value of what they produce.
Understood. Now, also there are some specific strategies or approaches that you're actually employing to ensure that there's not only environmental sustainability, but also economic viability. Could you dig a little deeper, Dr. Asad? I'd like to hear more about your yield intensification program.
Okay, so that's a challenge when we talk about sustainability and we look certification as a proxy to sustainability without a business case for especially small players like these independent smallholder farmers, and the journey being over 2 to 3 years, then it's very unlikely that these farmers are going to stay on that path. So the quest is, how can we have sustainability or sustainable certification in a way that it is incremental, it's rewarding on the way, and at the same time there's a business case which, as you pointed out, comes from an increase in yield. So if you can prove that you do the things right, so that's where our center, it's not just about certification, the journey continues where you adopt the good agricultural practices, you establish yourself as a learning farm, as an ambassador farm in the community, and we have results that show the yield has improved. Okay, and in the process, one single thing that happens is the farmers become very much aware. So theoretically speaking, actually, there is an immense potential to do more on the same land that we have. Today our farmers produce about 14 metric ton per hectare per year. You know, we can go up to 35, 40 if you go with the good
in general,
industrial standards.
ISH, the independent smallholders, they produce about 50% less than the national average.
National average is around 18 to 20, they produce around 12 to 14. So they're significantly less.
That's right.
So by doing more on the same land, that also answers the question of deforestation. So you don't need to open new lands. You can do more on what you have. And with these farmers, so Malaysia has about 6.4 million hectares, and if you say 16% of these are independent smallholder farmers, you can do the math. It's about 1 million hectares of land is managed by these independent smallholder farmers. And if they improve 30%, then there's a lot of land that we are saving by doing things which are right. So we don't need to open more lands. There is a great incentive and a business case right in there by doing things right.
I think that alone would help allay every environmentalist and researcher's fears when it comes to the expansion of palm oil plantations, right? Fantastically put. Thanks very much for that. Dr. Asad, now looking at the global impact of the palm oil industry, do you believe that these basically little test tube labs that you're running amongst these ISHs, particularly in Johor, could this be replicable across other regions in Malaysia and also perhaps in ASEAN? Let's look at even our neighbor Indonesia, or on the reverse, what we could be learning from some of their biggest lessons.
It's a continuous learning process, and I wouldn't claim we have a silver bullet. It took us some time to figure out what works. As I said, it's very much working with the people, working with the small farmers, and working with that particular geography and landscape. You know, we would want to replicate this as a validation of what we are doing kind of works, but again, it won't fit exactly. So for example, the independent smallholder farmers of Johor are very small, the ones that we are working with at least. We would want to expand to other areas. So we are looking at Pahang, which is the farmers, the independent farmers are bigger there, right? So it looks like it may be an easier problem in that sense. I mean, it's a very
scale-wise,
scale-wise. But
right.
So it's a very simple math. For example, if you, so it's a lot of training and cost that goes to the farmer. Now that farmer has a smaller piece of land. The premium is only as big as the land is, right? So if you spend the same amount of training and material for a farmer who owns a larger piece of land, right? So the premium will come from that larger piece of land, right? So return is better. But then the standards don't need to be designed that way, that a large farmer is preferred over a smaller farmer. Somewhere we have to look further into this. So these are these nuances where you need to really look as to what is the right thing, okay, versus something that benefits one section and then leaves the bigger part of the problem.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for highlighting that. Perhaps, Dr. Asad, we could end out our conversation by you giving us a little bit of advice or perhaps recommendations you have for best practices, because of course Malaysia very heavily into still producing a lot of agricultural as well as crash crops such as palm. Supply chains are always of interest. What are your recommendations for best practices for other academicians, other researchers, other practitioners who are also looking at these essential questions in their supply chains?
As I said earlier, and I will repeat myself, there is no one solution that we can say will fit all kind of supply chains, but then there are some common principles that, that we follow and we learn from as practitioners. So there can be many different ways to address a problem and many different correct ways, but the idea is, where do we make an intervention that makes the bigger impact? So unless our interventions and our policies are designed in a way that they address the challenges on the ground, okay, not the challenges which exist on the desktop when we look, the interventions won't be designed like that. So first of all, it requires a deeper insight, looking at what are the real issues. So, for example, I talked about the harvesting issue, I talked about the labor issue in terms of the oil palm, smallholder landscape. So we need to go in and see what are the socio-technological aspects of it that can be intervened. Now, there's a lot of talk about AI, right?
Generative AI,
Generative
for example.
AI. So, yes, you can bring it in, but then you bring in generative AI, it will help improve the efficiency, which is a big gap. Okay, AI can help improving the efficiency, can help managing it better. Okay, so for example, this whole area of managing ordering versus what happens from the mill and how the order gets back to the independent smallholder farmer through these multiple hops, how do they schedule the numerous harvesters which are not in enough numbers to give you the answer. So whereas once the fruit is harvested, you only have 24 hours, the quality goes down. And then the mills have their own capacity during the peak season and the down season. At the same time, you can leave the fruit on the tree to manage this for 2 to 5 days once the fruit is harvested. So there are different moving parts, and in a way it's like,
what I'm actually hearing is there's a lot more to be done for the human component before we can integrate generative AI, for example.
Generative AI can help there. So it's for me, it's a dynamic stochastic optimization problem. We can play it out and AI can help. Otherwise, it becomes very resource intensive. So this is where AI can come in and can help. At the same time, we have to have some of the physical solutions where, for example, drones are heavily being looked into. But then we have a challenge. Drones, mostly, they work good on field crops over the canopy. Drones that can work inside
a canopy,
such as oil palm,
Fantastic.
It's a challenge. So,
Dr. Asad, I think this has been such an interesting discussion. We could definitely go on into many more areas, but thank you so very much for your time, your expertise and insights.
Thank you, Tamina. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. Please join us again next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.